Tonight, we drift back to a time before written memory, before human history truly begins, guided only by the oldest words ever pressed into clay. The air is thick and hot, heavy with the scent of drying mud, baked barley, and the faint, musky odor of sheep's wool, a world so profoundly alien to our sensibilities that you probably won't survive this, at least not without a significant shift in your expectations about indoor plumbing and the availability of chilled beverages. But we are not here for comfort. We are here for understanding, to lie back and let the mind's eye reconstruct the very dawn of measured time. Imagine, if you will, the heart of this nascent world. A Sumerian temple complex, not the grand ziggurats of later Ur or Uruk, but its primordial ancestor, a raised platform of packed earth and fired brick, a man-made hill aspiring to touch the heavens, its walls whitewashed with gleaming gypsum plaster that reflects the brutal Mesopotamian sun with a blinding, almost divine intensity, a beacon visible for miles across the flat, green expanse of irrigated fields and winding canals. Inside, it is dim and cool, the thick mud brick walls insulating against the heat, and the only light filters in through high, narrow apertures, catching the dust motes that dance like tiny, slow-moving stars in the still air, illuminating painted geometric patterns on the walls and the looming, shadowy form of the city's deity, perhaps a statue of Inanna adorned in precious stones and a garment of woven wool. The floor is swept clean, but the smell of incense, of cedar oil, and of a faint metallic scent from the sacrificial area lingers, a sacred perfume that would be overwhelming to our noses. And in a side chamber, a priest, his head shaved clean, wearing a simple fleece skirt, sits before a pile of damp, gray clay, his stylus, a sharpened reed, poised, not yet writing, but waiting, for his first duty of the day is not to record, but to observe. To mark the precise moment when the sun's first sliver clears the eastern horizon, a moment determined not by a clock, but by the universe itself, a cosmic appointment kept for millennia without fail. This is where timekeeping begins, not with a tick or a tock, but with a silent, celestial observation, a ritual so ingrained that the very architecture of the temple is aligned to it, its corners pointing to cardinal directions established by generations of stargazers who slept on the roofs and dreamed of geometric order in the chaotic vault of the night. The mainstream historical fact we must cling to here, like a traveler clutching a waterskin in a desert, is the fundamental Sumerian base 60 numerical system, the sexagesimal system, which is the ghost in the machine of our modern timekeeping, the reason why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, a legacy pressed into clay tablets detailing administrative records, a system born not from abstract mathematics, but from the practical counting of things. Using the 12 knuckles of one hand, counted by the thumb, and the 5 fingers of the other, a beautiful bodily calculus. A quirky, fringe interpretation, which I offer with a gently sarcastic smile into the darkness of your bedroom, suggests that the base 60 system was actually a gift from the Anunnaki, the so-called ancient astronaut gods, who supposedly needed a more mathematically complex system for their interstellar navigation, and bequeathed it to their clumsy human creations, which is a fun idea until you realize it takes agency away from those ingenious, shaved-headed priests who were perfectly capable of inventing it themselves, while also figuring out beer, the wheel, and epic poetry, a pretty good resume by any standard. A scholarly debate that quietly rages in university halls concerns the very purpose of these early time measurements. Were they primarily religious, to mark sacred festivals and appease the gods with timely offerings, or were they economic, to regulate the labor of thousands of workers on massive irrigation and construction projects, a tool of bureaucracy before it was a tool of philosophy, a debate that mirrors our own modern tension between the sacred calendar and the punch clock. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, offering these whispered histories while you drift, because let's be honest, My channel analytics are probably being studied by a future civilization trying to understand our bizarre rituals of thumbs up and notification bells. I also extend a warm, sleepy invitation for you to share your location and the current time in the comments below, a little temporal anchor point in our shared present as we voyage so far into the past. A cozy thought that we are all listening together, from different time zones, all being gently bored into a state of profound relaxation by my discussion of ancient metrology. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, as we consider that first priest, squinting at the horizon, his stylus hovering, the weight of a city's schedule, a god's expected meal, and the rhythm of the cosmos resting on his ability to judge the exact shade of pink in the morning sky. A human becoming, for a moment, the calibrator of reality, the clockmaker of civilization. All before he's even had his morning bowl of porridge, which is a relatable mood, honestly, because nobody is truly functional before their first meal, not even the founders of temporal order. The joke here, of course, is that the first unit of time was probably the squint, defined as the interval between seeing the sun's edge and deciding your eyes hurt too much to look anymore, a unit still in use by teenagers waking up for school. Imagine his relief when he could finally delegate this task to a properly constructed instrument, like a simple gnomon, a vertical stick whose shadow became a sweeping clock hand across the dusty temple courtyard, a sundial before it was chic, marking the divisions of the day not in hours, but in watches, periods of guard duty for both soldiers and gods. They divided the day and night into 12 beru, or double hours each, a system that feels arbitrary until you try to divide a circle by anything else and end up with a messy decimal, proving the Sumerians were the original minimalists who hated clutter, even in their fractions. They watched the moon with a lover's attention, nodding its waxing and waning with obsessive precision, because their calendar was lunar, each month beginning with the first sighting of the crescent moon, a delicate silver thread in the twilight that sent messengers running to announce the new month, a system so reliant on clear skies that a cloudy evening could throw the entire administrative schedule into chaos, making the high priest the ancient equivalent of a tech support guy trying to reboot a server. Packing and praying for a break in the clouds. The lunar month, about 29.5 days, never quite fit into the solar year, a celestial mismatch that caused seasonal drift, meaning a festival meant for the spring harvest might, over a few years, find itself occurring in the blazing heat of summer, which is awkward when you've promised the god of fertility a party for new sprouts, and all you have to offer is sun-baked cracked earth, a theological and logistical nightmare they solved with intercalary months, inserted by royal decree. Making the king the ultimate arbiter of time, a power even our modern daylight-saving time bureaucrats might envy. Think of the scribes in their damp, clay-scented rooms, tallying the days since the last festival, the wages owed to laborers for so many days of canal digging, the interest accruing on a loan of barley after a certain number of months, their cuneiform signs for numbers and commodities spreading across the tablet like a beautiful, intricate code, the very first timesheets, a thought that should make any modern employee feel a deep, ancestral sense of dread. Because humanity has been clocking in for over 5,000 years. The humor in this is that the first written complaint in history is likely a Sumerian tablet grumbling about a copper delivery being late, proving that the anxiety over missed deadlines is not a modern condition, but a civilized one, born the moment we started measuring time in the first place, a self-inflicted wound we've been nursing for millennia. Their world was defined by cycles, not by a linear progression, a concept as soothing as it is profound. The sun cycled, the moon cycled, the river flooded and receded, the seasons turned, and even their stories were cyclical, with gods dying and returning, a worldview that likely made the relentless march of time less terrifying, more like a familiar spiral, which is a nicer way to think about existence than a countdown timer. Unless you're a king trying to build a legacy, then a linear timeline starts looking pretty good. They named their years after significant events like the year the high priest of Enlil was chosen, or the year the city wall of Ur was built, which is a charmingly anecdotal way to mark time, until you try to do your taxes and have to remember if you're filing for the year the Great Flood happened, or the year the donkey population was particularly robust, a system that makes fiscal year 2023 sound positively poetic. The night sky was their other, grander clock, a vast, rotating dial speckled with divine indicators, as they grouped stars into constellations long before the Greeks gave them fancy names, seeing in them not heroes and beasts, but their own gods and agricultural symbols, a celestial reflection of their muddy, earthbound world, which is a humble and beautiful perspective, connecting the irrigation ditch to the Milky Way with a single, imagined line. The scholarly debate about the uniformity of their timekeeping across city-states is a delicious one, because while we imagine a unified Sumerian system, it's likely that Lars's idea of when noon occurred and Uma's might have differed by a priestly squint or two, leading to minor diplomatic incidents, like showing up for a treaty signing only to find the other delegation still sacrificing a goat, a classic case of, are we on lunar standard time or solar temple time? The fringe theory here, which I share while you hopefully yawn and turn over your pillow, posits that the precise astronomical knowledge needed to align their temples was inherited from a lost, pre-flood civilization, like Atlantis or some even older culture, a romantic notion that again underestimates the power of generations of patient, naked-eye observation. Humans are remarkably good at seeing patterns, even if the pattern is just a way to know when to plant the barley so you don't starve. A powerful motivator for scientific advancement. Their water clocks, or clepsydry, came later, allowing time to be measured even on cloudy days or at night, a simple dripping vessel that turned the relentless flow of a precious resource into a measure of duration, a poetic and practical invention, likely first used to time the watches of the night guards, who probably complained that the slow drip shift was the worst, especially in winter, establishing the first workplace grievances around time theft, a truly ancient tradition. Imagine the soundscape of this early timekeeping. No chimes, no bells, but perhaps the call of a temple guard changing watch, the soft, rhythmic drip of water into a ceramic pot, the scribe's stylus going tap, tap, tap on the clay, and always underneath it all, the distant, lowing of cattle and the hum of human activity, a white noise machine of nascent urban life. The joke is that the first alarm clock was probably a junior priest whose job was to pour water on the senior priest's feet at a specific shadow length, a career path with limited growth potential and high risk of being kicked. They had no word for history as we know it, only a sense of in those days, a past that was both a template and a warning, recorded in king lists that stretch back into mythical time, where rulers reigned for tens of thousands of years, a blend of measurement and myth that feels comforting, a way of saying time is both vast and manageable, as long as you keep good records on durable material. As you sink deeper into your mattress, think of the clay, the eternal humble clay of the riverbanks, becoming the memory of the civilization, holding the imprint of a number, a date, a transaction, a prayer, fired in a kiln or baked in the sun, surviving millennia to whisper to us now about the birth of hours and seasons, a testament to the human desire to mark, to measure, to know our place in the great turning of things. And with that thought, we begin to slow our own internal clocks, sinking our breath to the imagined drip of that ancient water clock, the shadows lengthening in the temple yard, the moon climbing its starry ladder, and the world for a moment measured and peaceful, a lullaby of cycles and circles, a slow blink into the past where time itself was being invented, one careful observation, one pressed wedge, one dripping jar at a time, a process so gradual it could lull even the most anxious of modern minds into a state of rest. Knowing that the world turned long before we worried about wasting time, and will turn long after our own personal clocks wind down, which is either deeply relaxing or mildly terrifying, but I choose to believe it's relaxing, like a cosmic weighted blanket. The night deepens around you, and we descend further into the granularity of Sumerian time, leaving the grand temple for the dusty street, the administrative office, the riverbank, where time became not just a celestial phenomenon but a social adhesive, a tool for coordination that allowed the city, that fragile, magnificent experiment, to function without descending into a chaotic mess of missed appointments and unpaid barley loans, which, let's be honest, is the foundation of any successful civilization. Picture a sun-baked alleyway in the city of Lagash, where the shadow of a protruding stick on a mud brick wall marks the progression of the morning, and a merchant, smelling of garlic and sesame oil, agrees to meet a buyer at the shadow of the third mark. A crude but effective communal clock, a democratization of time that moved it from the priestly rooftop to the commercial district, though it inevitably led to disputes when a cloud passed over at the crucial moment, leading to the world's first argument about "I was here, you were late," a human tradition born with urban life itself. The mainstream historical fact anchoring us here is the development of the Sumerian calendar, a lunisolar masterpiece of compromise that wove together the moon's phases and the sun's journey, consisting of 12 lunar months with thrillingly poetic names like Month of the Barley Eating or Month of the Brick Mold. And when the seasons drifted too far, a 13th month, an intercalary month, was inserted by royal decree. A power move that essentially allowed the king to add an extra month of taxes or labor duty, a clever trick that would make any modern government accountant weep with admiration. This calendar was the beating heart of society, dictating the timing of religious festivals, agricultural activities, and legal contracts, a shared rhythmic framework that told everyone when to sow, when to reap, when to get married, and when to plead with the gods for rain, a collective cultural metronome ticking to the rhythm of the heavens and the whims of the palace bureaucracy. A delightfully quirky and fringe interpretation, served with a side of gentle sarcasm as you burrow into your duvet, suggests that the Sumerian months were not just agricultural markers, but coded messages about an ancient global cataclysm, each month name representing a stage in a forgotten planetary disaster, a theory that requires ignoring the very practical, barley-obsessed nature of the Sumerians in favor of a more cinematic, disaster movie narrative, which is fun, but about as likely as a Babylonian blockbuster starring Gilgamesh with explosive special effects. The scholarly debate that simmers in this area is whether the Sumerian calendar was truly unified across the patchwork of independent city-states, each with its own patron deity and slightly variant rituals. Some experts point to the stunning consistency of month names found in tablets from different cities as evidence of a shared cultural system, while others highlight local variations and the supreme authority of each city's ensi, ruler, to declare the new month, suggesting a tense harmony, a kind of ancient time zone agreement that probably broke down during wars, because nothing says conflict like disagreeing on what month it is while you're besieging someone's walls. The humor in their timekeeping is abundant. For instance, imagine the poor farmer whose loan repayment was due at the harvest moon, but because of an intercalary month insertion he forgot about, he now has an extra month of anxiety while his barley grows, the original bureaucratic nightmare, or the scribe who had to chisel out the royal decree for the extra month on hundreds of tablets, developing the world's first case of repetitive strain injury, a martyr for temporal accuracy. Their days were divided into 12 beru for daylight and 12 for night, but these were not equal hours as we know them. In summer, a daytime beru was much longer than a nighttime one, and in winter, the reverse, a fluid seasonal time that expanded and contracted like breathing, a concept that feels profoundly natural compared to our rigid atomic clock tyranny, a system where your lunch hour literally got shorter in the winter. Which is probably why they invented beer, to cope with the seasonal depression of a shrinking meal break. The water clock, or clepsydra, was their answer to measuring these unequal beru, consistently, likely a large, decorated ceramic vessel with a small hole near the bottom and markings on the inside. As water drained out, the level passed marks indicating the passage of a watch. And because the rate of flow changes with water pressure, they were constantly refined, a task for the temple's artisan priests, who were the original STEM majors, combining hydrodynamics, astronomy, and theology in a way that would baffle a modern academic advisor. The joke, of course, is that the first person to try and fix a leaking water clock with bitumen probably ended up sealing it shut and creating a very expensive, useless pot. A cautionary tale about DIY repairs that resonates across the millennia. Now, let's consider the social impact of this measured time. It created schedules, and schedules created supervisors, and supervisors created the need for accountability, leading to a pyramid of management that culminates in your modern middle manager, whose lineage can be traced directly back to a Sumerian overseer named Lugal-Zage, who stood in a field with a sundial stick, yelling at workers to dig faster before the shadow reached the next marker, a proud and ancient tradition of stressful employment. The fringe idea that these water clocks were actually devices for communicating with the underworld, with the dripping water representing the tears of the goddess Inanna during her descent, is poetically beautiful but pragmatically unlikely, unless the underworld's primary concern was the punctual changing of the night guard, which would make it a surprisingly orderly place, more like a well-run subway system than a realm of eternal gloom. Timekeeping was also deeply personal. A Sumerian's life was measured in tangible biological stages rather than years. You were a child, then a youth, then an adult with responsibilities, then an elder, and your age was less important than your social role, a perspective that might reduce our modern anxiety about milestone birthdays, unless your social role was canal dredger, in which case you were probably counting the days until retirement, which was likely a short count. The scholarly debate about the standard length of a biru is a classic academic pastime, with some interpreting tablets to suggest it was equivalent to about 2 of our modern hours, but variable, while others argue for a more fixed, double-hour concept, a debate that matters profoundly to about 12 people in the world. But to them, it's the intellectual equivalent of a thrilling detective novel, with clues hidden in cryptic administrative texts about worker shifts. Imagine the sound of time in this context. The constant, gentle drip-drip from the temple's water clock chamber, the calls of the watchmen from the city walls as they announce the passing of the night watches, the scribe's stylus on clay keeping a permanent record of hours worked, goods stored, and time elapsed since the last audit. A symphony of administration that, if you listen closely enough, is the sound of civilization building itself, one tedious record at a time, a lullaby of bureaucracy. The invention of the written contract, tied to time, was a revolution. A tablet could stipulate that a man would work a field for 3 years in exchange for a share of the crop, or that a loan of silver was to be repaid in the month of the direction of the plow, making time an enforceable, legal concept, which is when lawyers began to appear, circling like vultures over a promising clay tablet, another ancient profession born from our need to measure and bind. The humor lies in the fact that the first time someone was taken to court for being late, they probably argued that the plaintiff's sundial was incorrectly aligned. The original, "my clock is right, yours is wrong" defense, a tactic that has served procrastinators and errant spouses for 5,000 years. They even had a concept for overtime, though not by that name. Texts mention extra rations for workers who toiled beyond the normal shadow length, a reward for giving up their personal time, a tradition that has evolved into the modern struggle for work-life balance, though the Sumerian workers' life balance probably involved not dying of exhaustion, a low bar, but a meaningful one. The stars, of course, were their grand clock for longer cycles, and they meticulously recorded the heliacal risings of certain stars. When a star first becomes visible in the dawn sky after a period of invisibility, events that marked key agricultural and religious dates, a practice requiring precise observation and clear skies, making the astronomer priest some of the most respected and also most anxious civil servants, as their entire year's schedule depended on not missing that one crucial appearance because of a cold or a cloudy morning. A fringe theory posits that the Sumerians possessed knowledge of the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble in Earth's axis that takes 25,800 years to complete, a concept usually credited to the ancient Greeks. Proponents point to certain mythological numbers and the longevity of their antediluvian kings as coded references to this cycle, a tantalizing but highly speculative idea that turns their king lists into an astronomical textbook, which is a stretch, like saying a grocery list is a treatise on economics, because it mentions the price of eggs. The practical joke of history is that while we struggle to remember appointments in our digital calendars, a Sumerian scribe could probably recite the festival schedule for the next 5 years from memory, because his livelihood and social standing depended on it, and also because there were far fewer distractions, like streaming services or the existential dread of social media, making his brain a pristine, clay-tablet-ready organ. Time was also mythic. In the epic Tales, heroes like Gilgamesh grapple with the finite nature of human time, seeking immortality and finding only the wisdom to accept his measured days, a philosophical struggle born directly from the very act of measuring life in seasons and reigns, a poignant reminder that the moment we started counting our days, we started fearing their end, a bittersweet side effect of temporal awareness. The debate over whether Sumerian timekeeping was scientific or religious is largely a modern false dichotomy. To them, observing the sky was a divine duty that yielded practical results, a seamless blend where pleasing the god of the sun and knowing when to plant were two sides of the same clay tablet. A holistic worldview we've since fragmented into separate departments of theology and astrophysics, to our possible detriment. As you grow sleepier, imagine the slow, patient work of calibrating a water clock, filling it to the exact same level each dusk, checking its markings against the first stars of the evening, a ritual of reassurance that the universe was orderly and measurable, a comfort we've lost in our age of nanoseconds and network latency, where time feels fractured and frantic, not a flowing river but a shattered pane of glass. Their years were named, not numbered, which personalized time, making each year a story. The year the king smote the city of Umma, or the year the sweet water was abundant. A poetic chronicle that turns history into a series of headlines, some triumphant, some tragic, all marking the passage of time in a narrative form, which is how our brains work anyway, remembering our own lives and events, not in days, a deeply human way to process temporal flow. The joke is that if they had a year the tax collector was unusually thorough, nobody would write that down, proving that selective history is as old as history itself, a tradition carried on by every schoolchild's essay and every corporate annual report. In the silence of your room, with only the hum of your fan or the distant sound of a car, try to sync your breathing to the imagined metronomic drip of that ancient water clock, a steady, slow, relentless marker of moments, each drop a tiny surrender to the flow, a letting go of the need to control time, and instead simply floating within its current, a lesson from the mud-brick towers of Sumer that perhaps the best use of measured time is to occasionally forget the measure, and just be in the dark. In the quiet, in the soft cradle of the night, where the stars they watched still turn, and the moon they tracked still waxes and wanes, and our own small hours are just a brief, gentle ripple in that vast, ancient, and beautifully quantified river. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, let's wander into the starlit domain of the Sumerian night, where time was measured not by the harsh sun but by the slow, majestic wheel of constellations. A celestial clock face painted with gods and myths, a practice that required staying awake when the rest of the city slept, a profession for the dedicated, the insomniac, and the truly devout, who probably consumed impressive amounts of strong, black Sumerian beer to maintain their vigilance, making them the original night shift workers with a divinely sanctioned drinking habit. Picture an observatory which wasn't a building but a designated flat section of the temple rooftop, perhaps with a low wall to block the city's few scattered lights, where a priest, wrapped in a woolen cloak against the surprising chill of the desert night, lies on his back, his eyes scanning the velvet blackness, a living sextant memorizing the positions of the plow or the great dog as they rise and set, his only tools his own vision, a few marking strings, and a pile of clay tablets on which he will, at first light, record his observations with stiff, cold fingers. The mainstream historical fact that guides us through this starry section is the identification and use of specific constellations and stars for calendrical and agricultural purposes, with the heliacal rising of the star we call Sirius, which they might have associated with the god Ninurta, signaling the crucial time for the annual flooding of the rivers, an event as important as the sunrise itself, a cosmic alarm clock for the entire agricultural cycle. A moment when the heavens directly dictated the mobilization of thousands of farmers and their families to prepare fields and reinforce canals, a symphony of labor conducted by a distant, twinkling point of light. They grouped stars into constellations that reflected their world. The wagon, perhaps our Big Dipper, the jaw of the bull, the shepherd of the heavens, practical, earthy images from their daily lives projected onto the infinite, a comforting domestication of the terrifying void, a way of saying the sky is just a grander version of our pastures and farmyards, which is a lovely, humble way to avoid existential dread while doing your job. A wonderfully quirky and fringe interpretation, offered with a soft chuckle that hopefully doesn't startle you, is that these constellations were actually a star map pointing to the home world of the Anunnaki gods, and that the stories attached to them are literal accounts of space travel and genetic engineering, a theory that turns the patient, stargazing priest into a kind of ancient mission control operator waiting for a pickup, which is a thrilling sci-fi plot, but requires ignoring the fact that the same priest also had to schedule the monthly sheep sacrifice and audit the temple's wool inventory, a rather mundane portfolio for an interstellar liaison. The scholarly debate that flickers like a star in this field is about the sophistication of their stellar observations. Did they merely note the rough timings of risings and settings for practical purposes? Or did they track planetary movements and subtle shifts with a precision that hints at a more abstract, mathematical astronomy? A debate fueled by cryptic tablets that list stars and dates in sequences that some see as simple almanacs and others see as early attempts to model celestial motion. A disagreement that is essentially about whether the Sumerians were brilliant farmers who looked up or proto-scientists who saw the universe as a puzzle to be solved. And the answer is probably both, because necessity is the mother of invention, and the necessity to not starve is a powerful motivator for watching the sky very, very closely. The humor in this stargazing endeavor is ripe. Imagine the junior priest assigned his first all-night observation, told to watch for the rising of the fiery star, who, after 3 beers to stay warm, starts seeing fiery stars everywhere and wakes the high priest for a false alarm, leading to a demotion to latrine duty, a timeless tale of overenthusiasm and poor judgment found in every workplace from ziggurats to modern offices. They had no telescopes, so their accuracy was based on decades of oral tradition and recorded data, a chain of knowledge passed from elder priest to apprentice, a living library of the night sky that could be interrupted by a plague, a war, or a particularly forgetful generation, which probably happened, leading to a great celestial recalibration period that involved a lot of arguing and pointing at different stars, the ancient equivalent of a software update gone wrong. The concept of the watches of the night was born here, with the night divided into 3 or 4 watches marked by the culmination, highest point of certain stars, a system used by guards, midwives waiting for births, and shepherds tending flocks, turning the starry sky into a communal, albeit complex, timepiece that required literacy in the celestial script, a skill that made the temple astronomers the revered keepers of a vital public utility, like the grid operators of the ancient world. But with better robes. A fringe idea suggests that the Sumerian zodiac, a precursor to the later Babylonian and Greek systems, was used for personal astrology, predicting the fates of individuals based on stellar positions at birth. But most evidence points to their astronomy being mundanely and magnificently practical and state-focused, concerned with the fate of the king, the city, and the harvest, not whether a merchant from Ur would have a lucky day. A reminder that in the beginning, the stars told the time for everyone, but only the powerful got to have their horoscopes done, a tradition that continues in some forms today, if you consider corporate forecasting a type of astrology. The joke is that the first astrological prediction was probably a priest telling the king, "If the star rises on time, your reign will be prosperous," which is a safe bet because if the star rises on time, the harvest will be good, and if the harvest is good, everyone is happy, including the king, making astronomy the original political spin doctoring. The planets, those wild sheep of the sky that moved against the fixed backdrop of stars, fascinated and likely troubled them, seen as manifestations of gods. Inanna was Venus, Nergal was Mars, their erratic motions needing explanation, which they provided through myth and careful recording, laying the groundwork for all future planetary science, born from the need to understand the whims of the divine in a predictable schedule, a contradiction they managed to hold in their minds without exploding. A cognitive feat. The scholarly debate about the Sumerian planisphere, a controversial tablet from Nineveh that some claim shows a sophisticated representation of constellations, and even a cosmic impact event, is a perfect example of how a single artifact can fuel centuries of speculation, with mainstream scholars cautioning it's likely a ritual or instructional text with multiple interpretations, while fringe enthusiasts see a precise star map from thousands of years BCE. A clash of perspectives as old as scholarship itself, and a reminder that sometimes a circle on clay is just a circle, unless you really, really want it to be a supernova. Imagine the soundscape of the night watch, the occasional cry of a night bird, the distant bark of a dog, the soft murmur of the priest reciting star names to his apprentice, the scratch of the stylus on the wax coating of a temporary tablet, the slow, deep breathing of a city asleep, and underneath it all, the vast, silent soundtrack of the universe turning, a hum too low for human ears but felt in the bones, a vibration of cosmic time. Their timekeeping was thus a layered cake. The lunar month provided the icing of religious festivals, the solar year provided the hearty sponge of agriculture, and the stellar markers provided the decorative, precise sprinkles on top, a confection that sustained a civilization. And while it might sound complex to us, to them it was simply the way the world worked, a series of interlocking cycles as natural as breathing, which is a profoundly calming thought as you breathe in and out in the dark, your own body a timekeeper of sorts. The invention of the ideal calendar, a schematic 360-day year used for administrative calculations, 30-day months times 12, separate from the messy reality of the true lunisolar year, is a stroke of bureaucratic genius, allowing for simplified planning and accounting, while the priests dealt with the inconvenient extra days. A division between theoretical and practical time that foreshadows every modern project manager's struggle with optimistic timelines versus real-world delays. The humor lies in the fact that some accountant, somewhere in Ur, probably got a headache trying to reconcile the ideal temple ledger with the actual harvest dates, leading to the invention of the footnote, or perhaps a desperate plea to the gods to make the moon behave more mathematically. As you sink deeper, think of the stars they saw, many of the same ones we see, though in slightly different positions due to precession, a change too slow for them to notice, giving them an illusion of eternal, unchanging order. A stability we now know is an illusion, but a comforting one like the steady rhythm of a story told again and again. The same heroes, the same plows, the same dogs in the sky, season after season, millennium after millennium, a constant in a world of human flux. A final fringe whisper before you slide into dreams. Some claim the Sumerians knew of the planet Nibiru, a hidden world on a long, elliptical orbit that caused periodic cataclysms on Earth, a story woven from misunderstood metaphors and modern imagination, a cosmic ghost story that is fun to tell in the dark but fades in the light of day, much like the stars themselves at dawn. The true legacy of their stellar timekeeping is not in wild theories, but in the profound idea that we, tiny beings on a mudball, could look up, see patterns, and use them to organize our lives, to plant, to feast, to worship, to build. A partnership with the cosmos that is both audacious and humble. A collaboration between human mind and universal clockwork that began on those chilly rooftops, under those brilliant, untamed skies. And as your eyelids grow heavy, perhaps you can feel a connection to that watcher, both of you looking up, both of you measuring the night in your own ways, he with his stars, you with the rhythm of your own slowing heartbeat, both clocks winding down in harmony for a moment with the great, slow tick of the universe. Now, as the deepest part of the night embraces you, we turn from the cosmic to the corporeal, from the stars to the soil, and to the most fundamental, grinding, and inescapable timekeeper of all for the Sumerian commoner. The labor clock, the rhythm of toil that divided life not into celestial events, but into units of work, of effort, of sweat beating on the brow under the relentless sun. A time measured in baskets of earth moved, furrows plowed and bricks laid. A democratic and brutal metronome that dictated the lives of 90% of the population, who likely cared more about the shadow's length on the field than the heliacal rising of Sirius, unless that star signaled a break from digging irrigation ditches. Imagine a vast, state-organized construction site, perhaps for a new temple platform or a canal extension, a scene of organized chaos where hundreds of laborers, conscripted as part of their corvée duty, move in teams, hauling baskets of earth on their backs up steep, ramped inclines, their skin coated in dust and sweat, their world reduced to the next step, the next basket, the next gulp of water from a shared clay jar. The mainstream historical fact that structures this section is the extensive use of labor time as an economic unit, meticulously recorded in administrative tablets that detail rations, barley, oil, wool, paid out for days of work, with different rates for different tasks, for men, women, and children, a system that turned human time and energy into quantifiable, manageable commodities. The true foundation of the state's power, and the engine behind those monumental structures that still dot the landscape of modern Iraq, silent testaments to millions of man-hours, a pyramid of effort built on clay receipts. These tablets are heartbreakingly precise. Lugal, overseer, 30 days, barley, 60 quarts, or the work crew of the canal, 15 men, 10 days, a dry, bureaucratic poetry that captures the sheer scale of human exertion, a ledger of lives spent in measured increments, a concept that should make you appreciate your own job, no matter how tedious, because at least you're probably not being paid in barley by the shadow length. A quirky, fringe interpretation, which I offer with a yawn that you are welcome to mimic, posits that these massive labor projects, synchronized by precise timekeeping, were actually efforts to build energy-collecting structures or landing platforms for the god's spacecraft, and that the standardized ration system was a form of protein-based fuel for a bioengineered workforce, a theory that adds a layer of science fiction gloss to what was essentially state-mandated, backbreaking work. And while it's fun to imagine a ziggurat as a giant battery, it's more accurately a giant pile of bricks built by people who really wanted to go home. The scholarly debate that rumbles through studies of these records is about the nature of this labor. Was it primarily slave labor, a vast underclass of enslaved prisoners of war, or was it a form of civic duty performed by free citizens and conscripted clients of the temple and palace, a complex system of obligations woven into the fabric of society, a debate that touches on the very definition of freedom and coercion in the ancient world? And the answer is likely a messy mix, a spectrum of compulsion where the only true constant was the need to show up when the shadow said to. Or face punishments that probably involved more labor or worse, a reduction in your barley ration, which in that world was a death sentence. The humor, dark as it is, lies in the universal constants of work, the overseer who paces, yelling, the shadow moves. To urge faster work, the laborers who develop an exquisite expertise in pretending to be deeply engrossed in adjusting their sandal just as the taskmaster looks over. The invention of the slow walk, when carrying a heavy load, all the subtle acts of resistance in a system designed to extract every possible grain of effort from the daylight, a ballet of obedience and evasion as old as employment itself. They likely used simple, portable shadow clocks, just a vertical rod in the ground, to mark the work watches, and the sound of the overseer's call marking the shift change would have been the sweetest music, a signal for a brief rest, a sip of beer, and a chance to complain about your blisters with your fellow basket haulers, the original water cooler chat, albeit with less water and more actual cooling off in whatever shade could be found. The fringe idea that the precise geometric alignment of their cities and canals required a lost technology of measurement, perhaps involving crystals or sound, is again a romantic escape from the more impressive reality. It required ropes knotted at intervals, wooden stakes, sighting poles, and an enormous amount of patient, repetitive surveying, a triumph of low-tech ingenuity and organized persistence, which is somehow more awe-inspiring than magic crystals, because it means ordinary people, with simple tools and complex social organization, literally moved mountains, or at least very large hills of mud brick. The water clock found its way here too, perhaps used by the foreman to time shifts in enclosed spaces, or at night for critical, round-the-clock tasks like smelting metal or guarding a crucial construction site. Its drip a merciless tracker of owed labor, a mechanical slave driver that never slept, a precursor to the modern time clock and the supervisor who times your bathroom breaks. The joke is that the first person to fix the worksite water clock to drip slower, giving everyone a longer break, was probably promoted to chief priest for his apparent miracle of extending the day, or more likely, thrown into the canal he was supposed to be digging, a cautionary tale about workplace fraud. Time was also the measure of craft. A master potter or metal worker might be given a certain number of days to produce a set of ritual vessels, his skill measured against the flowing shadow, the pressure of a deadline fueling creativity as much as dread, a dynamic every modern creative knows well, though with less fear of being sold into temple servitude for missing a delivery date. The scholarly debate about the efficiency of this labor system is a classic economic history puzzle. Was it a brutally inefficient drain on human potential, or was it a remarkably effective way to mobilize resources for projects that benefited the whole community, like irrigation canals that fed thousands? A necessary collectivism in a harsh environment, a debate that mirrors our own discussions about taxes, public works, and the role of the state, proving that the arguments in the taverns of Lagash were probably not that different from those in modern pubs, just with more references to the god Enki and less to partisan politics. As you lie perfectly still, think of the physicality of this time, the ache in the muscles that marked the passage of hours, the blister that formed by mid-morning, the grinding hunger that signaled the noon ration, the body itself becoming a clock, its fatigue and needs a more immediate timer than any star, a visceral animal time that we, in our climate-controlled, sedentary lives, have largely outsourced to devices, but which still whispers to us in stiffness and weariness at the end of a long day. They had festivals and holidays, of course, sacred days when labor ceased, a cyclical release valve built into the temporal system, days for processions, feasting and getting gloriously drunk on date wine, a necessary counter-rhythm to the relentless work beat, a societal exhale that made the next inhale of labor possible, a wisdom about human limits that some modern corporations could stand to relearn, though without the animal sacrifices, which would likely complicate HR policies. A final fringe whisper suggests that the repetitive, rhythmic nature of this mass labor, synchronized by drumbeats or chants, was a form of acoustic timekeeping that also served to alter consciousness and connect the workers to earth energies, which is a lovely, holistic idea, but the primary consciousness altered was likely one of pure exhaustion, and the only earth energy felt was the weight of it in their baskets. The true timekeeper for the common Sumerian was ultimately survival. The time to plant before the soil dried, the time to harvest before the storms, the time to repair the house before the winter rains. A pragmatic, urgent time that left little room for abstraction, a time woven into the very fabric of daily subsistence, a rhythm as old as humanity itself, just amplified and regimented by the needs of the city. And in that thought, there is a strange comfort. Our ancestors, for all the complexity of their calendars and star charts, were also just trying to get through the day, to feed their families, to rest their weary bones, and to find a moment of peace under the same moon that watched over them. A moon that marked not just months, but the blessed end of another day of measured toil. A silvery promise of rest that you, my listener, are now fully embracing as the labor of wakefulness ebbs, and the shift change into sleep is called not by an overseer, but by your own, mercifully unmeasured, drifting mind. In this penultimate section, as sleep's tide pulls strongly, we delve into the abstract, into the Sumerian mind's conception of time itself, not as hours or seasons, but as a philosophical and divine substance, a realm where gods operated on a different scale, where the past was a tangible force, and where the very act of writing was a form of time travel, a rebellion against oblivion that speaks directly to our own nocturnal anxieties about memory and legacy. All while you're cozily surrendering to the mattress, a much nicer fate than pondering eternity on a hard temple rooftop. Envision the tablet house, the Adubba, where young scribes, the elite technocrats of their day, sit cross-legged on reed mats, practicing their signs by copying out king lists that stretch back for generations, lists that seamlessly blend historical rulers with mythical ones who reigned for tens of thousands of years, a chronological tapestry that wove together the human and the divine, creating a past that was both legitimizing and awe-inspiring, a timeline where time itself became fluid, expanding and contracting to serve the needs of ideology and identity. The mainstream historical fact that anchors this speculative voyage is the Sumerian concept of me, pronounced me, a complex idea representing the divine decrees, the fundamental rules and essences of civilization, everything from kingship and truth to basket weaving and beer brewing, which were believed to have been bestowed by the gods at the dawn of time, a static, perfect template against which the messy flow of human time was measured, a profound notion that saw time not as linear progress, but as a striving to maintain or return to a primordial, divine order, a cyclical battle against entropy, which is a much more epic way to view doing your taxes than we usually manage. These me were the software of civilization, installed by the gods, and the king's primary duty was to uphold them, to keep society in sync with this timeless divine plan, making the measurement of time in festivals and rituals a way of hitting the refresh button on reality, of aligning the human clock with the cosmic one, a heavy responsibility that probably caused a few royal headaches, treated with more strong beer. A wonderfully quirky and fringe interpretation, which I murmur as if sharing a secret with your half-asleep self, is that these me were not metaphysical concepts but actual physical objects, perhaps crystals or data tablets, containing advanced knowledge from a lost civilization or extraterrestrial visitors, and that the Sumerian myths about them are literal accounts of receiving technological hardware. A theory that turns the god Enki into a cosmic IT guy distributing sacred flash drives, which is an amusing image, but reduces a rich philosophical concept to a sci-fi trope, ignoring the poetry of a culture that saw the essence of law and craft as divine gifts to be cherished and perpetuated. The scholarly debate that simmers around Sumerian temporality is whether they had a true linear sense of history or a purely cyclical one. Some point to their king lists and chronicles of city rivalries as evidence of a linear recording of unique events, while others emphasize the repetitive, patterned nature of their myths and the cyclical conception of time in their agriculture and astronomy, arguing that linear history is our modern projection, and they likely saw events as repetitions of archetypal divine dramas, a debate that matters because it shapes how we understand their motivations. Were they building for a unique future, or maintaining an eternal present? The humor, for there must always be humor, lies in the scribal school exercises, where a student, tasked with copying a king list spanning millennia, makes a mistake and shortens a god-king's reign from 36,000 years to a mere 3,600, earning a whack from the teacher's read and a lesson in the gravity of temporal inflation. Because when your history includes millennial reigns, you have to take your copying seriously. There's no room for a casual typo when documenting the age of demigods. Time was also deeply personal in a legal sense. Contracts included clauses about what happened if the hired man dies before his time is completed, a stark acknowledgement of human mortality within a binding economic agreement, blending the eternal me of law with the brutal, brief time of an individual life, a juxtaposition that must have been felt acutely, a reminder that their precise timekeeping existed alongside a very real awareness of time's ultimate, unpredictable end. The fringe idea that certain Sumerian hymns and incantations were designed to literally manipulate the perception of time, to slow it down for rituals or speed it up for healing, is a fascinating one that touches on the mind-altering potential of rhythmic chant and ritualized practice, a form of psychological time travel that we still experience in moments of flow or meditation, though they probably attributed it to divine intervention rather than neurochemistry. Which is a more glamorous explanation? The concept of destiny, or namter, was tied to time, a preordained lifespan or fate decreed at birth, but even this could be altered by the gods through divine intervention, introducing a chaotic, unpredictable element into the most carefully measured of lives, a narrative loophole that allowed for miracles and tragedies, keeping things interesting in a universe otherwise governed by celestial cycles and bureaucratic records. Because nobody wants a story where the ending is just a correctly predicted barley yield. The joke is that the first person to try and sue a god for unfair shortening of his namter probably found the legal tablets surprisingly unhelpful, as divine sovereign immunity is a tough nut to crack, even for a savvy Sumerian lawyer with a slick tongue and a good stylus. Their literature, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, is a profound meditation on time. Gilgamesh's quest for immortality is a rebellion against human time, his failure and acceptance of it, and his legacy through the building of Uruk's walls a compromise. He cannot live forever, but his works in stone and brick can endure, a poignant metaphor for their entire civilization's project, using measured, mortal time to create something meant to defy it, a struggle we all understand, whether we're writing a book, raising a child, or just hopping to be remembered kindly. The scholarly debate about the psychological impact of their timekeeping is subtle. Did the regimentation of life into measured units create anxiety, a proto-modern sense of time scarcity, or did the predictability of cycles provide a deep sense of security and place in the cosmos? The answer is surely both, depending on whether you were the priest setting the calendar or the laborer watching the shadow creep toward your shift's end, a dichotomy of experience that persists in our own world of planners and procrastinators. As your consciousness flickers, consider the act of writing itself as timekeeping. Each wedge pressed into clay was a moment fossilized, a thought captured from the river of time and made permanent, a magic as real as any me, allowing a receipt from 4,000 years ago to speak directly to us, a whisper across the abyss of centuries, a connection that defies the very linear time it helped to create, a beautiful paradox. They had words for different kinds of time. Yud for daylight time, mu for year, gestu for a moment or intelligence, a linguistic net they cast over the flowing reality of duration, attempting to hold it still with syllables, a project we continue with our own words like moment and era, never quite capturing the river, but building beautiful boats of language to float upon it. A final fringe whisper, a bedtime story within a bedtime story, suggests that the Sumerians encoded into their mythological numbers a grand cosmic chronology, a timeline of galactic events. But the truth is, their grandest chronology was right here on Earth, in the layers of their cities, in the sequence of their kings, in the cycles of their harvests, a story rich enough without needing aliens, a human epic written in mud and stars. And so, as we prepare to leave their world, think of them not as alien or mystical, but as profoundly, relatably human. They woke up tired, they counted the days until a festival, they worried about deadlines, they sought meaning in the stars, they feared death, and they built things hoping they would last. They measured time because they knew deep in their bones that it was both their most precious resource and their greatest mystery. And in that they are us, just with more clay and better defined calves from all that basket hauling. A comforting kinship across the millennia that makes our own nightly surrender to timeless sleep a shared, ancient human experience, a little death that echoes their own, and a rebirth in the morning that they would have understood perfectly, as the first sliver of light touched the horizon, and a priest, somewhere, reached for his stylus, ready to mark another day in the great, endless count. And so we arrive at the gentle shore of our journey, where the whispers of Sumerian timekeepers blend with the quiet of your room, and we must gather the threads of this long, meandering narrative, tying them not into a tight knot, but into a loose, soothing braid to accompany you into dreams, a summary that feels less like a lecture and more like a lullaby of concepts, a final winding down of the cognitive clock before the mainspring of consciousness fully unwinds into the soft, timeless foam of sleep. We have traveled from the first priestly squint at a dawn horizon to the stellar charts of the night roof, from the grinding labor measured in shadow lengths to the abstract me of divine order, seeing how a civilization built on mud and reeds also built an intricate cage for time itself, a cage made of observations, numbers, and words, one that still shapes our minutes and hours, a ghost in the machinery of our modern lives every time we glance at a clock face divided by 60. The mainstream historical fact that serves as our final anchor is the undeniable, lasting legacy of the Sumerian sexagesimal system in our measurement of time and angles, a base 60 gift that survived the rise and fall of empires, adopted by the Babylonians, passed to the Greeks, and eventually cemented into our global culture, a continuous thread of knowledge stretching from a clay tablet in Uruk to the digital readout on your phone, a testament to the power of a good, practical idea. Born from counting on fingers and knuckles, to endure millennia, outlasting gods, kings, and entire languages, which is a humbling and somehow comforting thought, that something so fundamental came from such a human, bodily origin. We've touched on the quirky fringes, from ancient astronauts to cataclysm calendars, not to lend them credence, but to enjoy the human capacity for wonder and pattern-seeking, a capacity the Sumerians had in spades, and which sometimes leads us down delightful, if improbable, garden paths, a reminder that the drive to explain is as powerful as the drive to measure. And both are part of our inheritance from those early city dwellers who looked at the chaotic world and insisted on finding number and story within it. The scholarly debates we've nodded to, religious versus economic time, linear versus cyclical history, the nature of labor, are the healthy, humming engines of understanding, showing that the past is not a static tablet but a conversation, one that continues in drowsy classrooms and late-night library carols, a conversation you've briefly eavesdropped on tonight, and one that will continue long after you've drifted off, because the study of time is, ironically, timeless. As you lie there, perhaps you can feel a faint echo of their rhythms. Your breath, a tide. Your heartbeat, a slow internal drum. The faint pulse of blood in your ears, a personal clepsydra marking moments only for you. A biological timekeeping system far older than any sundial. A connection to a primordial past where time was just the beat of life in the dark. Before cities, before writing, before measurement. A deep, animal time that sleep reclaims. The humor, we must have one last dose, lies in the ultimate irony. For all their meticulous efforts to measure and control time, the Sumerians, like us, were ultimately subject to it. Their mighty ziggurats now eroded mounds, their detailed tablets buried in dust, their precise calendars forgotten for centuries. A reminder that time is the great leveler, the patient force that laughs at our tiny clocks, but also the medium in which we create meaning, so their struggle was not in vain. It was profoundly, beautifully human. They left us a language for time, a way to speak about duration and sequence that allowed for law, literature, and logistics, gifts that enabled everything that followed, from the philosophy of Athens to the physics of Einstein, a foundation laid in river silt under a blazing sun by people who were, at the end of the day, just trying to figure out when to plant the barley and when to throw a good party for the gods, motivations we can all understand. So, as you finally let go of the waking world, let the concepts dissolve, let the facts blur, and simply rest in the knowledge that for a little while tonight, you kept company with the first clock watchers, the first calendar makers, the first people to ever argue about being late. And in that shared, ancient humanity, there is a deep peace, a sense of being part of a long, slow story that began with a shadow on a wall and leads to this quiet moment in the dark, a story that will continue in your dreams, where time becomes elastic, where past and present merge, and where you might even dream of a stargazing priest on a cool rooftop, or a merchant hurrying to meet a shadow, or a scribe pressing the sign for day into soft clay, a sign that looks like a rising sun, a circle with a line inside, a simple mark for a concept they gave to the world, a concept you are now releasing as you cross the threshold from measured time into the boundless, forgiving realm of sleep, where no one counts the hours. And all is rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.